Hello and welcome back. My name is Andrew, and I'm often called the Science Christian Guy because I love exploring the connection between faith and science. I make these videos to dive into the scientific perspective on biblical events, not to debunk them, but to deepen our understanding of God's miracles. I believe that science and faith go hand in hand, and by examining miracles with scientific curiosity, we can appreciate even more how amazing they are. In this new series, we'll break down the scientific process behind Jesus' miracles. Today we're kicking it off with one of the most famous miracles, Jesus walking on water, and even more, how Peter was able to do it. I'm excited to get into the details, so let's jump right in. First, let's recap the biblical story to set the scene. Jesus had just finished feeding the 5,000, and he sent his disciples ahead of him in a boat across the Sea of Galilee. In the middle of the night, with the wind howling and waves crashing, the disciples saw a figure walking on the water toward them. They freaked out, wouldn't you? They thought it was a ghost, but the figure spoke. "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." It was Jesus. Now Peter, I love Peter's boldness, said, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter actually stepped out of the boat and started walking on the waves toward Jesus. Imagine that moment, a regular man doing the impossible, walking on liquid water. But then Peter noticed the wind and waves around him, his fear kicked in, and he began to sink. He cried out, and Jesus grabbed him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" They climbed into the boat, the storm died down, and the disciples were in absolute awe, realizing Jesus truly is the Son of God. A couple important details here. The Bible notes that the boat was a considerable distance from land, about 3 to 4 miles out. In other words, this wasn't happening in shallow water or near the shoreline. They were out in the deep lake. No sandbars, no hidden rocks, just under the surface. It was also a stormy night, waves and all. This context rules out any easy natural explanation. So, what actually happened? How did Jesus do it? Let's put on our science hats and explore some ideas. From a scientific standpoint, walking on water is essentially impossible for a human under normal conditions. Water just doesn't support our weight in the way solid ground does. To understand why, let's consider the physics. Small insects like water striders can literally skate on water because of surface tension. The water's surface acts like a delicate skin that can hold their tiny weight. But as creatures get larger, this doesn't work. Surface tension force scales with the length of the contact, while weight scales with volume, which grows much faster. In simple terms, a human is way too large for surface tension to hold up. We'd break that water skin immediately. Bigger animals have to use a different trick to avoid sinking. Interestingly, there are animals that can run on water by sheer speed and technique. The most famous is the basilisk lizard, nicknamed the Jesus Christ lizard. Yes, named after this miracle. Basilisk lizards weigh only about 90 grams, which is about 3 ounces, and can slap their feet rapidly against the water about 8 steps per second. And they do that to create upward force. By slapping and stroking the water at high frequency, they generate pockets of air and lift, keeping them afloat for a short sprint. Some birds, like the western grebe, can also run on water for a few steps during mating dances by flapping their feet at about 7 steps per second. But these creatures are tiny compared to a human and are specially adapted for this. So what if a human tried to imitate the basilisk lizard? Physics says, no chance under Earth's gravity. A classic scientific study calculated that a human would need to slap the water at over 30 ms, roughly 67 miles per hour, to stay on top. That kind of speed and force is way beyond our muscle power, about 15 times more power than our legs can provide. In fact, even the fastest human sprinters can't come anywhere close to running 67 miles per hour, and certainly not while essentially stomping on water hard enough to hold them up. Another study went further. Researchers found that unless you reduce gravity to about 22% of Earth's gravity, similar to the moon's gravity, and maybe wear big fins, a person just can't run on water without sinking. They actually tested people in a reduced gravity simulator with water, and at normal gravity, everyone sank, of course. Only at much lower gravity could a person kind of do it with assistance. On Earth, we simply weigh too much and can't move our legs fast enough to overcome gravity and buoyancy. Could Jesus have been walking on something floating or hidden just beneath the surface like a trick? Modern illusionists have performed walking on water stunts using clever tricks. For example, magician Dynamo famously appeared to walk across the River Thames in 2011, but he was actually walking on transparent plexiglass platforms just below the surface. However, in the Sea of Galilee at night amidst a storm, it's extremely implausible that any floating platform or sandbar was involved. The disciples were mostly seasoned fishermen familiar with the lake. If there was a shallow area or a platform, they'd likely know or see it. Plus, Peter wouldn't have sunk. The gospel accounts make it clear this event took them by surprise and left them astonished, not thinking, oh, we just found a sandbar, so it wasn't an optical illusion or a known shallow spot. The text says they were in the middle of the sea far from land. In short, science tells us a person cannot naturally walk on liquid water. Humans are too heavy, gravity is too strong, and water just won't hold us up without extreme conditions or tricks. That's exactly why this event is considered a miracle. It defies the normal laws of physics. But that doesn't stop people, including scientists, from speculating how it might be explained. Let's look at a couple of scientific theories that have been proposed for Jesus walking on water. Over the years, a few researchers have tried to find natural explanations for this miracle. While these ideas are intriguing, they still show how extraordinary Jesus' feat was. Here are a couple of prominent theories. The first one is the floating ice theory. Perhaps the most famous scientific attempt comes from Professor Doran Nov, an oceanographer. In 2006, he published a study suggesting that Jesus might have been walking on a rare type of floating ice on the Sea of Galilee. How on earth would there be ice on a warm lake in Israel? Nov and colleagues pointed to a combination of unusual cold weather and unique water conditions. They describe a phenomenon called Springs ice. Basically, in just the right conditions, cold snaps could freeze parts of the freshwater lake, especially near salty spring outlets that created localized cold, dense water. According to their research, such floating ice patches might form maybe once in a millennium under those conditions. And interestingly, climate records suggest there were a couple of unusually cold periods in that region around 2,000 years ago that might have allowed brief ice formation. So Nov hypothesized that Jesus could have been walking on a piece of hard ice just underneath the surface, which the disciples, being a distance away in a storm, failed to see. It would look like he's walking on water. Now, even Nov admitted that this is a naturalistic explanation and might not be true. He offered it as a possibility, not a proven fact. And there are some big challenges with the ice idea. For one, the odds of that ice patch being right where Jesus needed it at the exact time are astronomically low. Nov calculated as extremely rare, perhaps once in 30 to 160 years, even in a colder climate. Second, the Bible says Peter walked out to Jesus. If Jesus were on ice, Peter would have had to find the same ice patch. But Peter didn't stay up, he sank when he doubted. Unless the ice conveniently melted or he stepped off it at that moment, which isn't hinted in the account, the ice theory doesn't fit well with Peter's experience. Also, the disciples worshiped Jesus after this. If it was just a natural ice flow, you'd think at least one of them might have eventually figured out that instead of concluding Jesus is God's son. So while the Jesus walked on ice study is an interesting scientific musing, and it got a lot of media buzz with headlines like Jesus walked on ice, not water, it doesn't really explain the event in a satisfying way. It does, however, highlight how incredibly specific and unlikely any natural explanation would have to be. There have been other lighthearted theories. I've seen folks jokingly ask, did Jesus have a school of fish clustered under his feet acting like a living platform? Or was there a hidden wooden plank or sandbar just below the surface that night? These ideas are pretty far-fetched. A bunch of fish collectively supporting a person is not supported by any science. Fish are slippery, dynamic, and would just dart away under pressure, not exactly a reliable footstool. And as we mentioned, being miles from shore in stormy conditions rolls out convenient shallow spots. Those explanations are fun to imagine, but there's no evidence for them and they don't match what we know about physics or the gospel details. Now let's shift from asking, could Jesus walk on water naturally, to the real question. If this miracle happened, what physical processes had to be altered, since that is the purpose of this series? Here are the main candidates. The first is surface tension amplification. Water molecules hold together through hydrogen bonding, which creates surface tension, enough for tiny insects like water striders like we've talked about. But for a 150 to an 180 pound man, the cohesive force would need to be millions of times stronger. That would mean rewriting how hydrogen bonds work on a molecular level. Nothing in nature makes this possible, but if the field forces between water molecules were enhanced, water could behave like a trampoline under his feet. Here's why that matters. Surface tension depends on the balance between molecular cohesion and gravitational pull. For insects, their mass is so low and their feet so wide that the water's skin can hold them. But as soon as you scale up, gravity wins. To hold up Jesus or Peter, water's intermolecular bonding would have to be so strong that each step displaced almost no surface at all. Imagine the molecules acting like tight springs locked together, far tighter than they normally are, so Instead of breaking apart, they resisted his weight. That means either the electromagnetic charge between water molecules was dramatically intensified, or the quantum field interactions that govern electron sharing were directly adjusted, or both. If that happened, the water surface would act almost like an invisible polymer sheet stretched across the lake, bending under pressure but never tearing. The remarkable thing is that if this was the mechanism, it would not just be water being water. It would be water behaving in a way the laws of chemistry don't allow on their own. In other words, this wasn't magic, it was the Creator reaching into the fundamental laws of matter and amplifying them at the exact time and place He chose. The second way is phase change into a solid, also known as localized crystallization. Normally, water becomes solid when it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, forming a crystalline lattice of molecules. But imagine if, only beneath Jesus' feet, liquid water instantly arranged itself into a solid-like structure. That would be like ice forming in real time under each step, but without the entire lake freezing. We know supercooled water can exist, which is water below freezing that doesn't crystallize until disturbed. If God triggered a phase change on command, the water beneath Him could become solid just for that step. And here's why that's significant. Supercooled water gives us a glimpse that rapid crystallization is possible. In labs, scientists can show bottles of supercooled water turning into ice almost instantly when tapped or poured. But that only happens when the entire environment is already below freezing. The Sea of Galilee that night wasn't. For Jesus to walk this way, it would mean God was controlling the molecular behavior of water so precisely that crystallization occurred only in a pinpoint area beneath His foot, nowhere else. Think about the precision. As soon as His foot pressed down, molecules snapped into a solid lattice. As soon as His foot lifted, they relaxed back into liquid. This had to happen step after step in rhythm with His movement without spreading outward like normal freezing does. From a physics standpoint, that's impossible without direct intervention because crystallization naturally propagates outward. Once ice starts forming, it wants to spread across the whole volume. The miracle here would be God not only initiating crystallization, but also stopping it from expanding, confining it exactly where it needed to be. So unlike the floating ice theory, which suggests Jesus stumbled on a rare ice floe, this is completely different. This isn't about random weather, this is about active control of phase change at the molecular level. In other words, Jesus wasn't standing on natural ice. He was commanding water to behave like ice wherever He touched it, forming a temporary platform beneath His feet with perfect timing. The next option we have is density or viscosity shift, also known as water behaving like a non-Newtonian fluid. Some substances like cornstarch mixed with water are non-Newtonian fluids. They float like a liquid when relaxed but act solid under sudden force. If the molecular interactions of water were shifted so that it briefly hardened under downward pressure, Jesus could step on it as if it was a solid. Nothing in pure water naturally does this, but if intermolecular forces were altered, water could behave like oobleck. This would mean the water under His foot instantly stiffened whenever pressure was applied, then relaxed back into liquid as soon as He moved on. Imagine walking across a giant pool of oobleck. Every step feels solid, but if you stand still too long, you sink. For Jesus, this effect would need to be even more extreme. The liquid would have to solidify instantly, not just thicken. The reaction would have to happen precisely where His foot touched, not spreading outward. And the effect would need to reverse completely the moment He lifted His foot, leaving no residue or trace. What would it take for water to act this way? At the microscopic level, intermolecular forces, the weak attractions that let molecules slide past one another, would need to be intensified or rearranged. In other words, the bonds would have to lock up momentarily, almost like snapping into a gel state, then unlock again. This is unlike anything seen in nature. Water is the ultimate Newtonian fluid. It obeys the rules of viscosity without exceptions. But if the field forces between molecules were adjusted, water could be made to act like a responsive material, flexible one moment, rigid the next. So if this was the mechanism, the miracle would not be about finding something unusual in the lake. It would be about God temporarily rewriting how water molecules interact, creating a surface that could bear His weight step by step. The next option we have is local gravity manipulation. Einstein's relativity tells us gravity is a curvature of space-time. If Jesus reduced His effective weight or warped gravity locally, then the downward pull would weaken and water would not need to support His full mass. This would be like making His body partially weightless, similar to the way astronauts walk differently on the moon, where gravity is about 16% of Earth's. No human can control gravity, but if Jesus altered space-time itself, the physics checks out. To put this in perspective, on Earth, gravity accelerates everything downward at 9.8 meters per second squared. On the moon, it's only about 1.6 meters per second squared, which is why astronauts can do those slow motion hops. If Jesus reduced his effective weight to, say, 1/5 of normal, then the pressure exerted on the water beneath him would be dramatically reduced. That alone could make walking across water possible because the water would no longer need to resist a full 150 to 180 pounds of force. How could that happen scientifically? In physics, gravity is described not just as a force, but as a warping of space-time caused by mass. Theoretically, if you could manipulate space-time curvature locally, you could alter the gravitational pull experienced by an object. That means Jesus may not have changed the water at all. Instead, he could have changed how gravity acted on him in that place and moment. This is not unheard of in physics thought experiments. For example, exotic matter or negative energy has been theorized to bend space-time in ways that allow for things like warp drives. Quantum gravity research explores how space-time could behave differently under unusual conditions. Of course, none of this is possible within human capability, but if Jesus is who the Gospels claim he is, the one through whom all things were made, then altering the pull of gravity on his own body would be simply exercising authority over the laws he wrote into existence. The effect would look exactly as the disciples described, a man walking calmly across turbulent water, unaffected by the fact that liquid cannot normally support human weight. And if this was the mechanism, it explains why Peter's doubt caused him to sink. Peter's faith connected him to that same suspension of gravity for a few steps. But once fear overwhelmed him, the normal pull of gravity reasserted itself, and down he went. The last option we have is quantum field override, which is the deepest explanation. At the foundation of reality, everything like mass, energy, particles, arises from quantum fields. If those fields were rewritten, matter would behave differently in that specific location. That means hydrogen bonds could strengthen, like surface tension, molecules could crystallize instantly, phase change, density could shift, fluid behavior, and gravity could weaken, field interaction. So technically, all of the above fit under the umbrella of a quantum level override. That's not magic or nonsense, it's the creator directly editing the code of creation. Think of it like software. If the laws of physics are the program that runs the universe, quantum fields are the source code. Everything you see, water, air, gravity, your own body, is an expression of how those fields interact. If the code is changed, the program behaves differently. That means a miracle like Jesus walking on water wouldn't be a contradiction of logic such as 2 + 2 = 5. It would be a recompilation of the program in a single area of space-time. Instead of water breaking under his weight, the code instructs it to hold. Instead of gravity pulling at 9.8 meters per second squared, the code instructs it to pull less. This is also why every other mechanism we've discussed can be wrapped up under this one. Whether it was enhanced surface tension, localized crystallization, altered density, or reduced gravity, it would all stem from one deeper act, a quantum field override. This way of thinking also explains why Peter could participate for a few steps. If faith was the authorization key that temporarily let him share in the override, then doubt removed that authorization and normal physics immediately reasserted itself. And here's the beautiful part. Understanding it this way doesn't cheapen the miracle, it magnifies it. It shows Jesus is not a magician doing tricks. He's the master of creation, literally editing reality at its most fundamental level. So if Jesus by his divine power could suspend the laws of nature and walk on water, what about Peter? How is Peter able to do it, if even only for a few steps? This is where faith comes into play, and it's something both the Bible and even some scientific insights can shed light on. According to the Gospel account, Peter was able to walk on water only when his focus was completely on Jesus. Jesus invited Peter to come, essentially granting him access to that miraculous override of physics. Peter stepped out in bold faith, and it worked. He took a few steps on the waves, but when Peter took his eyes off Jesus, looking at the wind and the waves, his confidence wavered. In that instant, he started sinking. Jesus identified the core issue, doubt. You have little faith, why did you doubt? From a spiritual perspective, the lesson is that faith connects us to God's power. The moment Peter's faith gave way to fear, the normal laws of physics reasserted themselves. Gravity was like, hey buddy, remember me? From a psychological perspective, this tracks with what we know about the human mind and body. In extreme cases, humans can tap into what's called hysterical strength. There are documented reports of people lifting cars off loved ones when adrenaline surged. For example, in Virginia, a 22-year-old woman lifted a BMW off her father when the jack failed. In crisis, the brain can override its usual safety limits and let muscles operate closer to their true capacity. But, and this is key, even adrenaline-fueled feats don't break physics. They don't change gravity or density. Peter's steps weren't just mind over matter, they were God over matter, with Peter's faith as the conduit. That's what makes this account so powerful. When Peter trusted fully, he stepped into the same suspension of natural law Jesus was demonstrating. When he doubted, that connection snapped and the ordinary rules of physics pulled him under. And here's the application for us. While we won't literally walk on water, our faith or lack thereof still changes how far we go in life. Keep your eyes on Christ and you rise above fear. Take your focus off him and you sink. In the end, all these attempts to explain how Jesus walked on water only underscore one thing. By natural laws, it couldn't be done. If it were as simple as finding an ice patch or a hidden reef, Peter and the others likely would have caught on. The event left the disciples utterly convinced of Jesus' divine power. The most straightforward explanation from a believer's perspective is that this was a true miracle, a suspension of the ordinary laws of nature by the creator of those laws. Now, as a science-loving Christian, I find these scientific discussions fascinating. They show that even if you look for a loophole in physics or a 1 in a billion natural event, walking on water is beyond ordinary explanation, and that to me is kind of the point. It's okay that science can't fully explain it. Miracles, almost by definition, are exceptions to the normal rules, but understanding the science around it, like how water behaves, how animals interact with water, etc., can give us a greater appreciation of just how remarkable this miracle was. So, what's the takeaway from examining Jesus and Peter walking on water through both a scientific lens and a faith lens? For me, it strengthens all in two ways. Scientifically, we saw how utterly extraordinary this miracle is. It's not something that could just be faked by a first-century magician or explained by a simple, natural quirk. Every attempt at an explanation falls short, which highlights that Jesus truly did something only God could do. Spiritually, we learn that faith was the key for Peter to participate in this miracle, and by extension, faith is key for us to see God work in our lives, even if not in such dramatic physics-defying ways on a daily basis. I make these videos because I believe understanding the world, science, enriches our understanding of the Word, Scripture. When I hear about research showing how impossible walking on water is, I don't feel my faith threatened. I feel affirmed that, wow, Jesus is Lord over nature in a literal way. And it also reminds me that God designed the laws of nature, so if he wants to override them for a purpose, he can. It's fascinating to explore how he might have done it, but at the end of the day, it is a matter of trust in Jesus, just as it was for Peter on that water. Now, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the science behind a miracle. This is just the first episode in our series on the science of Jesus' miracles, and I can't wait to explore more miracles with you, from turning water to wine to resurrection, from a perspective of both faith and reason. If you have questions or specific miracles you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. Before we wrap up, I want to speak from the heart. My mission with these videos, and really with my whole platform, is to help you combine faith and science in a way that boosts your life. It's not just about intellectual curiosity, it's about growth and transformation. I especially have a passion for helping men overcome personal struggles like lust and pornography, using a mix of biblical wisdom and scientific strategies. I know from my own journey that integrating faith with practical neuroscience and psychology can lead to real freedom and self-improvement. So, here's my call to action. If you're a man struggling with lust, or really anyone looking for personal development with a faith plus science approach, I invite you to connect with me. Follow me on Instagram, where I share daily insights and encouragement, where I work directly with people just like you. I'd love to have you join the community. I'm here to support you, answer your questions, and walk alongside you as we all strive to become the people God designed us to be. Remember, blending faith and science isn't about diluting either. It's about using all the tools God has given us to live a full life. Just as Peter stepped out in faith onto the water, you can step out in faith and use knowledge to conquer the challenges in your life too. Thank you for watching to the end. If you found this interesting, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content like this. Feel free to share this video with someone who loves science or needs a boost in faith. Until next time, stay curious, stay faithful, and I'll see you in the next one. God bless.